Silver birch bark. Now, what's amazing here is this. It is beyond that it was discovered by Neanderthals about 191,000 plus years ago. It is the fact that this silver birch bark tar, which we have long period of time assumed was some sort of like prehistoric superglue, actually was used to apply to wounds. And the discovery is this birch bark tar had quite an impressive antimicrobial effect on scrapes, bites, so on and so forth. Not so much as taking as an antibiotic internally, but as far as applying it to a wound, very effective. May even been an insect repellent because it spreads so thin, such a small amount, over a large area, which we're going to get to in a second. So what we're looking at is about 191,000 years ago, this tradition of anaerobic thermolytic extraction developed by our Neanderthal ancestors basically was carried down to indigenous tribes today. And it is a powerful, powerful tool. It may help us today, ironically, of all things, in the battle against antibiotic resistance, especially in regard to items like MRSA. So without further ado, let's get into the study itself here. We missed the first pharmaceutical revolution, probably because it wasn't put on parchment. So yeah, you can give Alexander Fleming credit for current penicillin and things like that, but reality, it goes back way far, way far. So much so I can understand institutionalized hubris discounting it because you go, hey, Neanderthals doing this? How is that even possible? But the chance of that occurring by accident is near zero because not only were they able to find a way through anaerobic thermolytic extraction methods as far as burying it into the ground, heat, and so on and so forth to get this tar, they also were able to identify the species of birch bark which basically yielded the greatest results. That requires a lot of critical thinking and the very least scientific method to basically come to that conclusion. So the odds of that happening were practically next to zero. So as we get into the study itself, let's read through a little bit. Neanderthals may have used birch tar for wound care. The researchers extracted tar experimentally from birch species that already existed during the Neanderthal era. The specifically employed extraction methods reconstructed from Neanderthal contexts. In one process, for example, birch bark was burned underground in a sealed pit. The absence of oxygen in dry distillation extracting the birch tar from the bark. Another method involved burning birch bark next to a hard surface, such as stone, so that the tar condenses on the surface of the stone. We thought this was some sort of superglue for the longest period of time because it really worked well to stick things together. But yet, maybe that as well, too. But you'll see. The researchers tested the birch tar samples they had collected to investigate the antimicrobial properties. All tar samples may have found effective at hindering the growth of Staphylococcus aureus bacteria, which is a major bacteria that plays a role in wound infections, is now classified as a multi-drug resistant hospital-acquired pathogen, except, of course, for the phenols in the birch bark. The antimicrobial properties of birch tar are evident across all extraction methods. These findings suggest that antimicrobial properties played a role as far back as the time of the early Neanderthals. It could have been used as a targeted matter, explains the researchers. Now, before you proceed, I want to show you a little more depth into the research here because it's important, because it's the zone of inhibition, which gentamicin obviously beat it quite substantially as far as the birch tar. But then again, the takeaway is you can produce so much so fast, you can produce it within 2 hours. And it spreads so thin, they even postulate it may have been an effective insect repellent to proceed. Indeed, quantities of birch tar sufficient for skin application are low. 0.2 grams of birch tar covers as much as 100 square centimeters of skin, which is real important when you think of the zone of inhibition. Inhibition. All right, efficacy in selecting ratios, you see right there, very effective against Staphylococcus aureus. Not effective at all against E. coli, even though they kind of alluded to the Neanderthals also had different herbs and strategies in regard to dental work. Quite impressive. And the relative drug efficacy. Remember, you're looking at zone of inhibition. I want to say zone of inhibition, same thing, but you get the point. They put a little bit in area and how much is effective as far as the antibacterial zone. But again, 2 hours from basically bark to extracting this particular item. I'm going to give you the postulate how it may have been produced for field medics and so on and so forth a little bit later on, but that's quite impressive. All right, so there you go. All right, and also too, they found that again, it's not so much the fact is it had like a direct antibacterial effect overall, like modern day antibiotics as far as the phenols. The phenols themselves seem to basically just break the cell walls down, as you'll see right here. All right, boom, there you go. What is exactly is killing the bacteria? The phenolic derivatives, the primary driver, basically to cause the cell walls to rupture and apoptosis. Quite impressive. But however, though, keep in mind, there's a warning here. More human studies have to be conducted, even though it was used 191 plus thousand years ago. Check out cytotoxicity and so on and so forth, and just to get a bearing on how much can be used and how often for your own personal safety and others as well. The layman's translation, all right, highly specific bark indicated a deliberate understanding of the physiological healing affordances. So that's pretty amazing that, again, by chance, not likely. All right, the multimodal cognitive complexity. Generating and maintaining a complex generational knowledge transfer indicates that deliberate wound care was a highly structured societal practice. They also had community health care on top of that. At least they took care of their own within their community. Don't want to add publisher bias too much. All right, now we go into the science breakdown, the methodological deconstruction. I'll go from there. All right, there you have the modern tin can effect. Obviously, the tin can's about 191,000 years ago. Again, intellectual hubris. I don't want to take that plunge. The Betula pendula, the silver birch bark was the one that worked the best, and the anaerobic thermolytic extraction methods was quite impressive as well. All right, the birch tar, the Pleistocene era. Again, that's the zone of inhibition. I don't know why it sounds so weird to say zone of inhibition, but that's what it is, ZOI. Here it goes for the field medic. The synthesis. Here we go. The field expedient synthesis. That's basically the breakdown. You put this in the context of a mythological story because it keeps me legally, how would say, protected. All right, the field expedient synthesis, the tint, the setup, the payload, the catch, and the burn. If you look right there, about 120 minutes from basically the setup to production in this scenario. All right, you bypass the modern resistance again, where you look at your antibiotics. You read down that little graph there, a little chart. It remained effective in its crude phenolic compounds, physically melt the bacterial cell walls. Mechanical construction is how it works, which may help us modern day today. All right, the austere application triage, now for waterborne illnesses, again, whatever it comes down to be, bites, scrapes, cuts, field equipment, and splints. And if you needed to see the breakdown, again, this is all the clinical news site where you can break this down. There is your post-collapse botanical antibiotic, so all is not lost in case of zombie apocalypse. Please understand why I put it in that scenario. And again, but it shows you how possibly something like this could be replicated in today's world. All right, study the architecture and validity. Now keep in mind, this was not a human or a living organism trial per se. Animal, put it that way, vivo. Polyvariable, so you have to go to B+, but the zone of inhibition was quite impressive overall because, as you showed before, it takes a very 0.2 grams to go 100 square centimeters. Yeah, you make up for smaller ones. The estimated cost to replicate the study, $17,000, not too bad. Now, if you want to create a human study, which I think is very viable, because again, with antibiotic resistance coming up, maybe our Neanderthals was trying to send us a message into their future, our past. The A+ human trial protocol for phase 2, about 6,600,000. Pretty good breakdown. I like to try to design these trials be A+, or have a good power rating. Bacterial inhibition zones, the ZOI. All right, you look right there. There's the BT5. That's different types of birch bark and so on and so forth. And you can see the silver birch was the overall winner. And they used dead trees. It wasn't like they took it from a live tree. This is just basically from things that were laying around. So that was pretty amazing. Formula and coefficients utilized in the study itself. There's your math for fun. You always got to show your work. And the glossary of scientific terms. The one I couldn't pronounce the entire time. Zone of inhibition, gram-positive bacteria, Staphylococcus aureus, and pyrrolus, the thermolytic effect, and so on and so forth. And the tribe. I couldn't pronounce the name of the tribe, but that's like one of the tribes in Canada today that basically has carried down this tradition over time. A lot of time. 191,000 years plus in time. Again, an incredible, incredible discovery. Wonderful, wonderful looking at things, breaking past that wall, as I said before, intellectual hubris, and saying, hey, maybe something else was here that we didn't see, and they found it. This tar was not just a glue because we're thinking, oh, Neanderthals need to do weapons and spears and so on and so forth. This was part of their communal healthcare overall that was passed down over 191,000 years to indigenous tribes, stories and so forth, and shaman and so on, so on and so on. Again, gratitude to the researchers. I am humble you watch. Look forward to see what you and I discover, i.e. or rediscover next week. Catch you all next time. See you then. Bye.